All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to your Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick will be doing our final thoughts and our final predictions for the college football playoff. We've already broken down both of these games in full. Link will be in the bio. We're going to start with some game notes, look at keys to each game, and then cap things off, some predictions. Timestamp below if you'd like to skip around. 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Pasadena, California. Interesting matchup here. Michigan, Alabama. In the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl, Alabama leads the all-time series 3-2. They've won the last two matchups, 2012, in convincing fashion, and then most recently in 2020 down in Orlando. That was also, a pretty big victory in favor of Alabama. Nick, Saban's phenomenal in these college football playoff games. Jim Harbaugh, 0-2, of course. He's also not very good in bowl games. Only one win in his time at Michigan. 1.5-point favorites here. Total set at 44.5. Likely to see a lower scoring contest. What's your thoughts so far on really the postseason success from these two different coaches? It's completely different on each side of the spectrum.
I think I'd certainly rather have Nick Saban on my sideline entering a playoff game than Jim Harbaugh just based off the stats. Nick Saban lost his first playoff appearance to Ohio State in the Sugar Bowl. That was a tough matchup, a really well-coached game by Urban Meyer. But since then, he's been flawless in opening playoff games and his teams have looked really good. They dominated Michigan State, dominated Washington. They looked really good against Clemson in the Sugar Bowl that one year. They dominated Notre Dame another year. They really have been a very strong team in opening playoff games. They really know how to get out there, set the pace, and dominate these matchups. This has been something that's been a bit of a staple here for Nick Saban. They looked really good against Cincinnati as well in the Cotton Bowl. Had a bit of a worse day, I think, because Cincinnati's defense had them shut down on the offensive side of the field. But overall, I think Nick Saban knows how to scheme these things up and win these games in the playoffs. You give him a month to prepare. That's a lot of time for a coach like him to write down the X's and O's and get something drawn up. Jim Harbaugh on the opposite side, right? They played Georgia 2 years ago, and we knew that was going to be a tough matchup, and not a lot of people picked Michigan in that game. But for them to get embarrassed like they did on the national stage was really disappointing. Then last year, a lot of people picked Michigan to beat TCU. It looked like a very favorable matchup for the Wolverines, and the Horned Frogs ran all over them and set the pace early, and Michigan had to play from behind the entire game. If Michigan wants to beat Alabama, they're going to have to set the pace early and control the game early on. They cannot be playing catch-up or from behind. They're simply not going to be able to beat Nick Saban and be able to do that.
Yeah, Michigan was like 10-point favorites, I think, last year, and they put they had around 50+ points. Like you said, the run game just destroyed them. McCarthy made some mistakes. Just a disaster of a game out there in Glendale. It's going to be a great scene there in Pasadena for a matchup we don't get to see very often. We never see Alabama really play out west, but when they do, it seems to be very effective in their favor. And then you looked at the Sugar Bowl to cap things off, 8:45 estimated start time. Obviously, the Rose Bowl always runs late. It's always an incredible game. Washington and Texas. I think Texas is one of the most dangerous teams in the country. I've been saying that halfway through the year with the roster they have, and obviously they have that victory already over Alabama. This team is dynamic in the trenches. They have plenty of weapons. They have a good quarterback who's highly matured. Even without Jonathan Brooks, they still have a nice backfield. This is a team that has plenty of playmakers. They have a great roster. They're set up to do damage, not just on January 1st, but going into the future as well. What do you think of this matchup, Nick? 63.5, obviously almost 20 more points than the game being played in Pasadena. So obviously we're expecting, a bit of a shootout in this one. But do you think that by chance we could see less points than that?
I think this will be a shootout. I think this is a great opportunity to be a shootout. People have been comparing it to the game last year. These two teams did meet in a bowl game last year. They met in the Alamo Bowl with Washington winning 27-20. That game was a closer matchup between two teams that were, beginning transitions to head towards being competitive in the next season. These teams have only met 5 times as well, with the previous matchups occurring in the 3 of them occurring in the 1970s, a home and home in Seattle and Austin, and then a bowl game in the Sun Bowl, and then they also played the 2001 Holiday Bowl. So another matchup that we rarely see between Washington and Texas here. I think it's going to be an absolute track meet. We've seen Texas put up a lot of points against opponents. We've seen Washington be involved in track meets against Oregon twice and some of their other SEC Pac-12 opponents such as USC and other teams like that. I think this will be an absolute track meet, a shootout. I expect Washington to take tempo early and try to set the pace for this game. Texas will have to try and keep up, and I think they're more than capable of doing so.
Yeah, kind of like they did against Oregon. A red-hot Duck team came into Vegas, got stonewalled there early. They had to play from behind. They ended up taking the lead. Washington didn't waver. And this is a rare matchup. Again, only 5 total matchups. One being played last year down in San Antonio. Washington won that one 27-20. Obviously, I think that's going to be something both teams are looking at heavily during this preparation, is that game from a season ago where Texas played a lot closer than I think people thought. They played Penix in this receiving group better than anticipated. If you're thinking back to that game, obviously it's just a random bowl game. And, it's not going to be too much weighing here. But we're going to go ahead and move on to the Rose Bowl. Some of the keys to the game, things to watch. I want to start with this Bama run defense. Obviously against Auburn, didn't look very good. Going into the game against Georgia, where I picked them to beat the Bulldogs, I said I'm not worried about that run defense. 244, 2 scores, and almost 6 yards per carry. It's embarrassing. It's awful, right? Georgia, that also didn't look all that great against Auburn. Just the threat that they had with their speed and some of the weapons they have. For some reason, it works against these high-end SEC teams. So I wasn't shocked one bit when I saw them bounce back and only allow 78 rushing yards, 2.5 yards per carry against the incredibly physical rushing attack from Georgia. They did give up 3 touchdowns. Most of them, all of them really in the red zone for the Bulldogs. That's what they're facing here, Nick. Another physical ground game. Georgia, I think, is the best example of that, and I think they do a better job than Michigan in that aspect. But we're talking 1 and 2 when it comes to physical running games. They just played really good against this one. Can they do it better or to the same tune here against the Wolverines?
Like you said, the only team that's really been able to unlock the key against Alabama defense this year is Auburn, who play really great. Hugh Freeze seems to draw up something fantastic when he goes against these stronger SEC programs. He seems to get his guys dialed up. I think Alabama will have a great day against this Michigan running attack that has not been very efficient at all recently. They've struggled the last couple of weeks here against some pretty comparable defenses. You're looking at your likes of Penn State, Ohio State, and Maryland, who are very comparable run defenses to Alabama, in my opinion. I think this is a great opportunity for Alabama's run defense to step up and plug those holes early on and create the opportunity for Michigan to have to play from behind the sticks and J.J. McCarthy to throw the ball. We saw McCarthy barely throw the ball against Penn State, also not as many attempts against Ohio State as you would expect from a quarterback of his caliber. Had a few more attempts against Maryland, but I think this is an opportunity for Alabama to make this a one-dimensional offense of Michigan, force McCarthy to throw the ball as well as to use his legs in the deep down field here. I think Alabama has a great opportunity to do so. They're a big physical unit up front. They've been dominating this year. Dallas Turner off the edge has been great against the run and as well as getting sacks against the quarterback. This is a very efficient Alabama run defense that's getting better throughout the season, 3.7 yards per attempt on the ground. They have a great opportunity here trying to stonewall this Michigan offense that does have some great weapons in the backfield.
The Wolverines rushing attack, they did better than I thought they would against Penn State. They were able to turn out 227 yards, really grinded down them and being able to stay on the field. And they pretty much closed the show against the Buckeyes. They had a long rushing touchdown in that one. And then in the fourth quarter, they were able to eat up a lot of clock. Still only about 4 yards per carry, 156. 66 yards, though, against Iowa. You figured they'd probably struggle to run the ball there. But I figured they'd do better than 2 yards per carry. I mean, that's an elite defense here, and I'm sure that's a better defense than Alabama's. But it's going to be a similar philosophy, though, from the Crimson Tide. And the run game efficiency, it's not the same. 4.27 yards per carry. We're looking at, over 5.5 each of the last 2 seasons for Michigan. And, Michigan fans want to argue with me. It's not all that efficient, but it just isn't. It's been the case all year long in the middle of the season against some conference opponents like Michigan State, Indiana, Purdue. I mean, they just were not very efficient. They still have 35 touchdowns, scored at least 1 touchdown in each game this year. Blake Corum is pure money when they get into the red zone. 24 touchdowns this year, over 1,000 yards for him, but he's going to be facing another stiff defense. Justin Igbany is phenomenal. Tim Smith has been great. Jamarian Latham, Tim Keenan. I mean, this is a defensive line. They still don't have that elite talent by any means. Igbany, though, does have an 11.5 TFL. But some of these linebackers have been great at filling gaps like Deontay Lawson. Jahad Campbell's really stepped up this year. So this is going to be a big thing to watch. Michigan's rushing attack hasn't been that great the last 2 years in the playoff. And Alabama, they were able to flip the script in a week notice, and they were great here at stopping the run against Georgia. And so it's a very similar matchup, Nick. I'm very interested to see how it plays out overall. Looking at number 2, big thing to watch is Michigan's offensive tackles versus these dynamic edge rushers. You alluded to J.J. McCarthy not having many passing attempts against Penn State. And that's because they shut down the passing attack. They're able to do just enough on the ground to get by in that game, but they didn't want to throw the ball. They were getting absolutely throttled by their tackles against that pass rush. Penn State has very talented players, but so does Alabama. They have 2 of the best in the country, in Chris Braswell and Dallas Turner. These guys are very effective off the edge. Probably didn't make their presence felt as much against Georgia like I thought they would. Only 2 sacks for the Crimson Tide in that one. But these Michigan tackles have proven to be a liability this year. Carson Barnhart, I'm thinking he's still probably going to be at tackle. If not, I think it's better for them to kick him in at guard and, let, different guys like Trente Jones get to start at right tackle. Ladarius Henderson, Miles Hinton, whoever's been playing for them at left tackle hasn't been as great, especially Henderson. This is going to be a thing to watch, Nick, because these tackles, they've been a problem this year, and we haven't really noticed it because they haven't played the toughest of opponents. And, of course, they've adapted and adjusted against their tougher opposition. But here against Alabama, sometimes adapting, got to do more than that.
You're going to have to certainly step up against these talented edge rushers from Alabama. Dallas Turner has been very efficient off the edge. Big shoes to fill when Will Anderson went to the league having a great season with the Houston Texans. I think Dallas Turner has been fantastic. I mean, the other edge rushers have been solid as well. Braswell's been in the backfield a lot. This is a very effective unit coming off the edge, dynamic, like you said. Turner especially, he can break and move on you. Henderson and Jones are two concerning tackles. Barnhart potentially playing at right guard. I think that makes a lot more sense than having him out there. Miles Hilton might get a move at either left tackle or right tackle as well. So I think this is something you have to watch, see what does Harbaugh kind of throw out there, who's going to be his go-to guy. Because like you said, when Penn State had the opportunity to put pressure on McCarthy, the team just decided, hey, we're going to run the ball here. We're going to try and get that job done, and we're going to avoid throwing the ball and putting our main passer in trouble here in the backfield. He could certainly be in trouble early on if they rough him up very quickly and get in the backfield. I think that's a big game plan opportunity for Alabama, is make McCarthy uncomfortable very quickly, send the pressure very early on, and make sure McCarthy knows you're there.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly going to be something to watch. You're probably going to have to throw the ball in this game more than you had to do against Penn State or the Buckeyes. You're looking at number 3. I think this is a big key. It's not being discussed really at all. Is, J.J. McCarthy's legs against man coverage. And the reason I say that is because Alabama was not good at all against Jaden Daniels in defending his legs. 11 carries for 163 yards, and he had a touchdown as well. And it was really just due to Alabama playing good man coverage and there being lanes downfield. And obviously that's pretty common, right? But there's ways you can certainly, counter that. A good pass rush, QB spies. J.J. McCarthy, he doesn't have the greatest of talent at pass catcher, like an LSU did or anything like that. And he certainly hasn't had the greatest of games over the past month or so. But when you look at J.J. McCarthy, he still has that ability that Jaden Daniels had to hurt you with his legs. Sure, he's probably not as fast, but this is a decisive runner, a guy who can really change games with his legs. And staying on the field, that's the cup of tea for Michigan. Makes me pretty concerned, Nick. I'm sure that Saban is well aware of that. Not many other people in the media are talking about it. I'm sure the Alabama coaching staff, Kevin Steele included, they're well aware of what McCarthy can do with their legs, especially after that game against the Tigers.
You'd have to imagine that they're preparing for this and scheming up ways to make sure that this happens. You're potentially having a spy, maybe. I'm not entirely sure what the full recipe is going to be here. Jane Daniels had a fantastic day against Alabama on the ground. He was really dynamic, like you said. He's a very dynamic runner. I think he's a more dynamic runner than McCarthy, but you cannot understate McCarthy's ability on the ground. If Michigan wants to stay involved in this game, design QB runs and opportunities for the signal caller to make moves on the ground with his feet are going to have to happen for this team. I think they have an opportunity to do so, like you said, against an Alabama team that we've seen get beat on the ground once or twice by star running quarterbacks. Thorne occasionally for Auburn also had some opportunities to run the ball on the ground. So they're very vulnerable to that in certain situations. I think they'll be able to neutralize it. They have a whole month to practice and set that up to make sure that that does not happen. But that is definitely something to keep your eye on and make sure that this is something that the Alabama defense is very cautious about and prevents McCarthy from being able to torch them on the ground.
The last big key I want to discuss here in the Rose Bowl, Jalen Milroe's maturity, of course. This is a player that has improved tremendously. Remember back week 2 against Texas, made some really bad plays. Had a bad interception against Kentucky. That was probably his most recent one. A bad pick against A&M. This guy was really settled in, though, at quarterback, making good decisions. I've always talked about how he has a beautiful deep ball. I also like his acceleration and speed as a runner. But over the last 2 months, he's finally showcasing that decisiveness I was looking forward to. And so that's why I talk about his maturity. A guy that's also really improved as an intermediate passer. But I think the biggest thing here is, this Alabama rushing attack, they're not going to be really any better, I think, than the Wolverines will, because they just haven't been good all season long. They do have 30 touchdowns of their own, 12 coming from Milroe, 172 yards per game, 114 against Georgia. That was the number for them. Timely runs. They kept them on the field. Conversions. That's really what you're going to look for. Nothing on the stat sheet. But when it comes to QB rushing yards, I think that's something you certainly got to discuss. Milroe, one thing he didn't look great against Georgia was just holding the ball too much. I like how he's improved in terms of trusting his pocket. But it looks like he's trying to trust his pocket a little too much, and that led to Georgia being able to come down with a numerous amount of sacks. And that's something you can't do against the Wolverines. You don't want to, set them up in short fields. You don't want to be behind the sticks. So how many rushing yards does he need truly, Nick, in this game for Alabama to feel confident?
I think he needs to have a decent amount. He had 155 against LSU, 107 against Auburn. Those were the two highest totals for him this season, the only time he broke 100. He had 36 against Kentucky and 69 against Mississippi State. I think somewhere in that 40 to 70 yards range would be a solid number. He had 29 yards against Georgia. I think really the big thing, like you said, is the maturity. The last interception was against Kentucky, so 3 games in a row with no interceptions against Georgia, Auburn, and I guess UT Chattanooga doesn't particularly count as a really tough opponent here. Texas was able to get 5 sacks on Milroe early on in the year. Georgia got 4. He took 6 against A&M, 5 against Arkansas, and 4 against Tennessee. So he has a presence to take sacks. I think he has to cut down on that in this situation here. We saw him carry the ball 18 times against Auburn and 20 against LSU. I'd like him to carry the ball, 10 to 15 times would probably be the sweet spot for me, which they had 14 carries against Georgia from Milroe. I like the idea of designing QB runs against this Michigan defense. I think it can be a real opportunity to get Milroe involved and add an extra wrench into the offense for this team. I like Milroe to be comfortable here in the pocket. I think he's a good opportunity to just continue to do what he's done throughout the second half of the season. Been really comfortable, focused, and not making mistakes. This Michigan secondary is a solid unit, and they will pounce on you if you make mistakes.
Certainly think he needs a net positive of 50 yards at the end of the game for them to feel pretty happy. Can't take those bad sacks. Maybe they can overcome it, but I think Milroe, it's going to be interesting to see what they devise. A month to get ready. Very interested to see what Tommy Rees and these guys have found on tape where they can really utilize his speed, because this is a really good football player when he's used properly. Flash forwarding to the Sugar Bowl, the biggest thing here is, how is Washington going to defend these guys in space? Xavier Worthy is terrific. A.D. Mitchell, he's not exactly, a shifty athlete by any means, but a nice physical pass catcher at the top of his routes. He's really good at breaks. These guys can certainly get exposed in space. Jatavian Sanders, a phenomenal player as well. Got to take into account some of these running backs as well. This is a Texas offense that does a great job in terms of, yards after catch and after contact. Obviously, Jonathan Brooks went down. We both were like, we're not too worried. C.J. Baxter, Jaden Blue, you guys will be just fine. Keelan Robinson as well. He had a nice day against Oklahoma State with 2 touchdowns and 75 yards and only 4 tries. They absolutely demolished Oklahoma State, right? And this is a team, Jordan Whittington as well. They're absolutely loaded here. Talk about Quinn Ewers being able to get them the ball. He's coming off an elite performance. We had 452 and 4 scores against Oklahoma State. This Texas offense is very tough, Nick, when they're throwing it out to the boundary. They love quick screens. When they get fast moving with the run game clicking, they get these guys in space and they do it very well. Xavier Worthy is very special in his own right. Jabbar Muhammad probably going to be on him for a majority of this game. But these guys, they have to be sound in terms of tackling, in terms of giving up a lot of yards. Texas, that's their strength, Nick. I think Washington may struggle in that area like we've seen at times this season. You remember that game against Oregon, Trayshawn Holden. We thought the game was out of reach, and then he instantly, boom, in a click of, a minute, was gone 70-plus yards for a touchdown to, make it a closer game there late. They ended up sealing the deal, but stuff like that, they can easily happen here against Texas.
I think it certainly can happen. And I like the idea of having Muhammad against Worthy. I think it's a good matchup for Muhammad. He's a very solid corner, a very physical, nice lockdown corner here. It's a good opportunity to go against an extremely talented wide receiver in Xavier Worthy, who's been fantastic for Texas this year. This Texas offense has been exactly as good as we hoped it would be, potentially even better than what we had hoped. They're a really talented unit that can fire on all cylinders, even without Brooks, who went down to injury. Like you said, we saw it in the Oregon game, where even late in the game, they had issues. The secondary had issues for Washington. They let up some big plays and let Oregon make that a little closer of a contest. I think Texas will have a good day with the big plays. That's a big opportunity here for Sark and company. Can you dial up a bunch of big plays for Ewers to exploit the defense with his weapons? I think they have Mitchell as a great opportunity, because Mitchell will have a better matchup, considering Muhammad will be matched up against Worthy. I like Mitchell's matchup there. I think he has a good opportunity against whichever corner and secondary piece that goes against Mitchell. I think A.D. Mitchell will get a lot of targets here and be very effective in this game. I like Texas offense to have a good opportunity and put up a lot of yards and points against this Washington secondary. That's why I think this will be a track meet down there in New Orleans. A good opportunity for this offense to really show what they're capable of.
Yeah, Texas, again, they're going to attack the boundary a lot of screens and whatnot. You got to be powerful. You got to fight through those. And if they can do that, I think this will be an interesting game. That's really where Texas gets going. Looking at the second key point here, the Husky offensive line, Joe Moore Award winners. They're elite up front. I've been talking about that all year long. It's really an underrated part of this football team, because obviously they're incredibly flashy with what they can do through the air. But there's a reason for that. It's because this offensive line creates clean pockets for days. Obviously, left tackle Troy Fatanu, he's terrific. Over right tackle as well, Roger Rosengart. These two have been phenomenal this season. Only allowed 2 sacks total between them. and these guys both have, a combined 1,000+ pass blocking reps. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary, the amount of dropbacks they have. Center Parker Brailsford, he is elite as well. But, the reason it says this might be a winnable matchup for Texas on the interior, Brailsford's terrific, of course, but Nate Kalepo and Julius Buelow at guard, these guys, they've been good, but they haven't been elite by any means. You know what I mean? So, and now they're facing Texas, who has terrific defensive linemen, especially on the interior. Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, elite defensive linemen. Alfred Collins has been really good for him as well. Obviously, this is a team that has terrific edge rushers as well, and Barron Sorrell. Jet Bush has been good. Ethan Burke has been terrific this season. But more so the guys I talked about, Sweat, Murphy, Trill Carter, Collins, when they put him on the interior. These guys might have a winnable matchup, Nick, which it might make things harder for them to run the ball. That's obviously Texas is great at stopping the run, and that might be, kind of favorable for Washington because that's not where they really care to win that much anyways, even though Dylan Johnson, this rushing attack, has been a big part of this offense. But if they're getting beat on the interior, Nick, and they're causing havoc, that's the easiest way to disrupt a big arm quarterback who's great downfield, pressure him on the interior. Texas might just be able to do that, especially if they're blitzing a great linebacker, Jalen Ford, or even Anthony Hill.
That's a big opportunity here for Texas, right? Can they get in the interior and dominate? We saw them dominate in the interior against Alabama and help them win that game in Tuscaloosa. Another blueprint opportunity here for this front defensive unit, which has been very physically strong for Texas and dominant in the trenches. This is a good Huskies O-line, a great Huskies O-line, actually, a very strong unit, like you said, award-winning unit. But they're facing a very tough talent here with Texas. A lot of good edge presence. These guys, they get off the edge. They're big physical guys, they get in the backfield and make Penix uncomfortable. If Washington cannot run the ball, it's not the biggest tragedy in the world because this team, like you said, is more than happy to throw the ball a million times if they have to. Penix has a great arm to do that, and he's a fantastic quarterback. If they can make Penix uncomfortable and make him second think some of his options and hit him a little bit, get him uncomfortable early on, Texas could have a lot of success. I think Penix is in a good situation here. I think the O-line will be able to hold up for most of the game and make him comfortable. But if they start to falter a little bit and there's some serious pressure on him, that could be a big problem for Michael Penix.
Biggest reason why this will probably be high-scoring affair, even though Washington might be able to stand up against the run quite well. We know Texas certainly will. As both secondaries have really been prone to allowing big plays. Obviously Washington, Jabbar Muhammad is terrific at his cornerback position. They have some other guys that are really gonna have to step up on this side of the ball. Around him, and obviously some injuries early on in the season really hurt them. Guys like Devon Banks, Asa Turner going down was tough. Elijah Jackson on the other side, though, he's going to have to be big. The safety group has been iffy at times this season for Washington, which is certainly going to be a bit of a problem, something you certainly want to monitor as how guys like Dominic Hampton will perform. I think overall these corners, though, they've been battle-tested this year. Michelle Powell, he's been a good one. Thaddeus Dixon, Cameron Fablucon at his safety position. These are some guys here that are going to have to be really good in allowing big plays. Neither secondary is really great at that, in terms of 30-plus yard passing plays allowed. Washington 123rd in that category. Texas slightly better at 93rd. And Texas, their secondary has really played good, I would say, over the last couple of games of the season. Guys like Malik Muhammad, Gavin Holmes, they've been really good. Jerry and Thompson, when he's been on the field, certainly impressive parts of this secondary, but they've been prone to allowing big plays. Ryan Watts, I don't know what his status is going to be. Jalen Gabu, whenever he was in the slot, was certainly a guy you could attack. Terrence Brooks as well as more reliability. Muhammad, though, playing more at the end of the season. It really emerged for them. He's going to be playing with a lot of confidence after two really big games. But both secondaries are probably going to struggle in this game, Nick. Who do you think is going to crack the most? It's probably going to be the biggest key in this contest.
That is absolutely a huge key for this game, right? Which secondary can hold up and look good? I think, Washington's secondary looked good against Oregon at times. They were able to put that team in check. Obviously Texas secondary had a good day against Oklahoma State. Comparing Oklahoma State and Oregon passing attacks is not a very fair comparison, but I think it is something to look at. Texas secondary was good against Alabama early in the year. They've been good in other matchups as well. They had some struggles against Oklahoma, though, a pretty solid passing attack. I think Washington's a good opportunity here. If they can keep this game in front of them and don't make mistakes like they did against Oregon, if they are really protective and solid like they were against Oregon, they can easily win this game and make Texas play catch-up and put them in a tough position.
Yeah, and then, the final key, I think it's important, something that's probably not going to get talked about. Numbers are numbers, but I think this is some that are certainly very interesting to talk about, is the red zone efficiency. Texas, their biggest criticism of mine throughout the years, they're just not very good at finishing off drives. It's really off the big plays. Once they get in the 20, it's really hard for them to finish things off. 120th nationally on offense for Texas in terms of touchdown percentage in the red zone. And then you look at the defense there of Washington. They're 118th nationally in touchdown percentage allowed. I mean, they're not good at anything, Nick. One's got to crack. We're just talking about the secondary. Somebody's got to crack. But here, this is going to be a big thing here. If it's just going to be a shootout, touchdowns and field goals. Washington gives up plenty of touchdowns. Texas doesn't score many touchdowns. So what do you think is probably going to happen here on at least that side of the ball?
Again, another very interesting to look at, right? It's all just numbers on paper, but Texas red zone efficiency has been a really big problem for this team, and that can continue to be a problem for this team. If they have to settle for field goals early on, that could put them really behind the chains, as Washington is very efficient and gets the job done when they need to. I think, the 80% red zone success for Texas is something to certainly keep an eye on. That is not a number that is as high as you wanted to see. You were hoping that number would be higher if you're a Texas fan. Meanwhile, Washington, 85%, nearly 86% red zone percentage and converting their opportunities. So I think Washington has a clear edge there. They're more efficient in the red zone. 6% is a big jump when you're at those high levels. That's very scary if you're a Texas fan.
And then on the other side of the ball, Washington 19th nationally in red zone touchdown rate, and then Texas, their defense, they're 10th nationally allowing touchdowns. So these are pretty interesting numbers, Nick, because it's bad on one side, and it's good on the other. Can't wait to see the final tally on this one. I'm guaranteeing whoever settles for more field goals, though, is going to lose in this game. Yeah, and it's just numbers, but some very interesting stuff here. I think this is an interesting Sugar Bowl we have all together. What are your final thoughts on this ball game?
I think it's an exciting matchup here in New Orleans. Two teams that are in the playoffs. Texas first time in the playoff, Washington their second appearance. Should be a very pro-Texas crowd. I've been told that there are a lot of UT fans making the trip to New Orleans a bit short of a trip for them than all the way from Seattle, Washington. These are two programs heading in the right direction with big changes coming as they join the SEC for Texas, the Big Ten for Washington. This is a big opportunity for one of these coaches to stamp their mark on college football and get a chance to win a national championship, potentially with a date with one of the two heavyweights in the sport in Alabama or Michigan. This is a big opportunity for both programs of young coaches who are continuing to rise the ranks and be some of the best coaches in football.
Now moving to our final playoff predictions, really just mine. Nick, being an Alabama alum, won't say too much in terms of predictions. But for me, I'm going to take Alabama to win over Michigan. I'm going to go ahead and take them by 10 points in this one. I just think they're going to collapse the run game of Michigan. I think McCarthy is probably going to make some mistakes. They just don't have the talent to really, at pass catcher, try to wear down Terry and Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry. I think it's going to be hard for them to generate offense. And I think Alabama, it's certainly going to be hard for them to run the ball. But I think Milroe's certainly going to make up for a lot of that. They're going to find some big plays in the passing game, at least, on third down in the intermediate range, maybe uncork a deep ball or two. I think just Saban is too hard to bet against here. I know they're underdogs going all the way out to Pasadena. I'm not really worried about any of that. A month to plan for Nick Saban. It's just too much to bank on, especially when Jim Harbaugh the last 2 years has had a month to plan, Nick, and they've looked flat out awful in the CFP games.
It's very interesting, certainly. I'm excited to be attending this game as an alum. I want to go support my alma mater. So I will be traveling to LA. I'll be there in person. I'm very excited to experience all that the Rose Bowl has to offer. A historic venue for two historic programs. You really can't think of a more perfect venue for two teams of these calibers. I'm going to avoid making picks for both games. I know I made a previous pick for the Washington-Texas game. I won't make a repick on that at this point. I'm just going to leave both games untouched. I'm very excited. I think this is a good matchup for Alabama. I think it's a good matchup for Michigan as well. Like you said, though, I think if you're an Alabama fan like I am, you got to be confident in the fact that Michigan has had two straight playoff disappointments in a row and has looked really miserable out there. They also haven't won a bowl game in several years. I think the last time they won a bowl game was 2013. I believe they lost 6 bowl games in a row and some bad losses in those bowl games as well. So Michigan has not really been playing great in the postseason in the last decade or so. Certainly concerning if you're a Wolverines fan.
Seems like they'd have a pretty good edge in the national championship game. In the Sugar Bowl, got Washington outlasting Texas. Again, I think Texas is great. It's a phenomenal football team. And I also have the Huskies winning the national championship, though. Just some stories have feel-good endings, and I think Michael Penix and these receivers. This is the matchups I used to live for as a kid. Nick Saban and his great corners and, the defense they always played with against these elite quarterbacks and some nice weapons. I just think Washington, they're going to win the national championship here. I think Texas is an incredibly tough matchup for them, but I think they're certainly going to be able to exploit some big plays. They're going to have to be pretty good against the run, though. Sugar Bowl should be an exciting matchup. I'll take the Huskies to win the national championship, Nick. Regardless, this is going to be a great playoff. I think the committee got it right. Final Four playoff, era, 14 playoff era, that is. I think it's going to be a great one, regardless. Bama down at Pasadena getting the win in New Orleans. Huskies, they'll be meeting January 8th in Houston.
This is a fantastic setup for the final playoff. Like you said, next year, everyone's excited to have on-campus playoff games, and I can't wait for that. But the final playoff in the 4-team era. I think they got it right, leaving out Florida State, putting Alabama in. This could be a great matchup between, like I said, two historical programs in Alabama and Michigan, and two programs that have been swinging on the up very conveniently here and having great coaches leading them into new eras. This is a great tale for two historic programs and two programs that have their own history and are looking to make some more here. Great matchups on New Year's Day.
To me for today's episode. As always, Nick, I appreciate you joining me. We'll be back right after these games conclude to break down the national championship game.
Looking forward to getting out to Pasadena. Cannot wait for this weekend.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.
Fantastic.